In the turbulent times of World War II, the story of the Ukrainian SS stands as one of the most controversial and complex. From their formation to their roles in the war, their history is both pivotal and terrible. From their origins, driven by a mix of nationalist aspirations and the harsh realities of Nazi and Soviet occupation, to their actions on the battlefields and their involvement in some of the war's most tragic events, their history is a blend of ambition, tragedy, and infamy. Join us as we delve into the origins, actions, and lasting impact of the Ukrainian SS, unravelling the truths and myths surrounding this infamous unit. During the first half of the Second World War, the German military appeared to be an unstoppable force, seemingly beyond the capability of any nation to resist. The Wehrmacht, the armed forces of the Third Reich, employed highly aggressive tactics that were rooted in the strategies of Prussian and Imperial German military planners. These strategists had long emphasized the necessity of short wars that concluded with decisive victories, deliberately avoiding protracted and costly wars of attrition, especially those involving irregular enemy forces that could deplete troop reserves. Following the catastrophic defeats at Stalingrad and in North Africa, the German military faced an unprecedented manpower crisis by 1943. Hitler recognized that the German armed forces could no longer sustain their hold on occupied territories while also achieving a victorious conclusion to the war. On February 18, 1943, Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Minister of Propaganda, delivered a speech at the Sportpalast in Berlin, acknowledging the dire situation Germany faced. Similarly, Hitler attempted to establish a defensive front against the advancing Bolshevist threat, and became receptive to Heinrich Himmler's proposal to form a Waffen SS volunteer unit composed of recruits from Western Ukraine. Although the idea of recruiting Slavs was typically abhorrent to the racially conscious Führer, the historical ties of these volunteers to the former Imperial Austrian territory of Galicia rendered them more racially acceptable. From the outset, it was clear that the formation of the Galician division was intended to serve German interests. However, the Nazis maintained lines of communication with Ukrainian nationalists to create the illusion of support for an independent Ukrainian state. In reality, Germany's primary focus in 1943 was on the Eastern Front and creating a pan-European defence against Bolshevism. A recruitment drive was launched in Galicia under the propaganda slogan, quote, "Everyone to the division," end quote, attracting thousands of volunteers, including intellectuals, idealists, and opportunists. These recruits underwent intensive military training before being deployed to the Eastern Front in June 1944. Due to a combination of unfavourable factors, the Battle of Brody, which took place from July 13th to July 22nd, 1944, marked a disastrous combat debut for the Galician division against the Red Army. The majority of the division was annihilated during this engagement. Despite this significant loss, reports indicated that the Ukrainian troops had performed commendably. As a result, Himmler ordered the division to be reconstituted. However, by this time, the pool of willing volunteers had nearly vanished, necessitating increasingly coercive measures to replenish the division's depleted ranks. In October 1944, the Galician division was still deemed unfit for frontline combat and was therefore reassigned to Slovakia for security duties. Andrij Kopanicia was among the conscripts sent with the division to help suppress a national uprising following the Polish Home Army's valiant but doomed attempt to liberate Warsaw. For the newly reformed division, composed mainly of untested recruits, counterinsurgency operations in Slovakia proved to be a steep learning curve. However, by early November, a successful reconnaissance strike by a hunting patrol south of Rosenberg demonstrated the division's newfound competence in Bandenbekämpfung, bandit fighting. The troops had become seasoned soldiers, adept at locating and destroying well-armed rebel groups. Although significant engagements were rare in the Tatra and Fatra mountains, these operations, often conducted in snow and freezing conditions, helped build the soldiers' endurance. This resilience would soon be tested further. In February 1945, the Galician Division was deployed to Slovenia to conduct anti-partisan operations against Marshal Tito's formidable forces, which threatened German communications. Remarkably, even at this late stage of the war, local commanders adhered to the strategy of absolute destruction in their anti-partisan efforts. These largely ineffective operations were carried out in dense forest-like terrain and the rugged mountains that characterized the region. For the soldiers, it often felt like chasing shadows, as the partisans repeatedly disappeared into the wilderness like will-o'-the-wisps. Reflecting on the conduct of small wars since the Napoleonic era, it is evident that much was demanded of troops engaged in operations against irregular forces. The personal toll was significant, with many soldiers suffering from stress due to the challenges of fighting in a foreign and hostile land far from home, where the fear of death was surpassed only by the fear of capture. This was particularly true for German troops and their foreign allies and auxiliaries, who faced highly motivated and well-equipped insurgent and partisan forces in Eastern Europe, the Balkans and Russia during the Second World War. Recently, an increasing number of academically sound and objective appraisals of the Galician Division's wartime record have emerged. These studies provide a counterbalance to the accusations of atrocities committed by Ukrainian troops involved in counterinsurgency and anti-partisan operations, offering new evidence and perspectives that refute claims of criminality against former division members. Nevertheless, several questions persist. Were soldiers like Andrij Kopanicia victims of circumstance, or were they willing participants in Hitler's sinister plans? Should they be viewed as valuable allies against communism during the early Cold War period? These questions have engaged academics and commentators for decades and will likely continue to do so for many more years, with no definitive answers in sight. The story of each volunteer and conscript who served in the Galician Division from 1943 to 1945 is unique, shaped by their individual experiences and personal histories. The non-aggression pact between Hitler and Stalin, though shocking to the world, was a strategic move for both leaders who had plans for Poland. The Nazis, in their usual duplicitous manner, relocated Ukrainian nationalists back to German-occupied Poland, while Hitler handed over substantial territories like Bukovina and Galicia to the Soviets. The Ukrainian population in Galicia, expecting liberation, instead faced harsh Soviet rule. Initially, Soviet repression targeted Polish nationalists, intellectuals and Jews, but eventually shifted towards anti-communist Ukrainian nationalists. Soviet propaganda claimed their invasion was to liberate Belarusians and Ukrainians from Polish control, and for a time, Ukrainians in Galicia were favoured in administration, culture and education. However, this was merely an attempt to sway support from the OUN, which ultimately failed, leading to repressive measures against Ukrainians by mid-1940. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union stemmed from his belief in German superiority and the perceived weakness of the Soviet regime. By mid-1941, confident in a swift victory, Hitler abandoned the German-Soviet pact. The initial stages of Operation Barbarossa seemed to validate this confidence as the Soviet army appeared weak and disorganized due to Stalin's purges. Ukrainian nationalists, especially those led by Stepan Bandera, saw the invasion as a chance for a Ukrainian national revolution and aligned with the Germans, hoping for support in establishing an independent state. Many Ukrainians fled to German-occupied zones and joined the Wehrmacht, believing Germany was their only hope against the USSR. Despite vague promises from German officers, the Ukrainian nationalists continued to prepare for regional revolutionary administrations, aiming to demonstrate to their people that an independent Ukrainian state was achievable, even as their naivety about German intentions became apparent. The rapid German advance into western Belarusia and Galicia caught the Soviet administration completely off guard. In Galicia, the panic-stricken and suspicious NKVD conducted last-minute arrests and deportations of thousands of arbitrarily chosen civilians, labeling them as anti-communist and sending them eastward, destined for Siberian gulags. On June 30th, just 8 days after the massive invasion began, the first German units entered the Galician capital of Lviv, known to the Germans as Lemberg. Accompanying these units were Ukrainian Nachtigall volunteers. These men had witnessed the NKVD's hasty murder of several thousand Ukrainians during their retreat, which intensified the local population's hatred of the Soviets and created a fervent nationalistic atmosphere. Seizing this moment, the radical wing of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, proclaimed statehood in a small meeting room in the Prosvita Society building. However, 2 German officers present at the meeting dampened the enthusiasm by reminding the crowd that the war was still ongoing and that it was not an appropriate time to declare statehood. The very important meeting between Wächter and Himmler on 2nd March 1943 at Himmler's headquarters in Hochwald, East Prussia, occurred shortly after the devastating German defeat at Stalingrad. Recognizing the urgent need for manpower, Himmler began to see the value in Wächter's pragmatic policies in Galicia. Previously uninterested in recruiting foreign contingents, the Wehrmacht had begun enlisting auxiliary volunteers, or Hiwis, from various Soviet regions by late 1942. With Germany's military resources dwindling, even the strict racial criteria of the Waffen SS were relaxed to incorporate troops from racially acceptable populations. By early 1943, approximately 4,000 Ukrainians were already serving in the German-created Ukrainian police and guard units. Wächter, seizing the moment, proposed the formation of a Ukrainian division to bolster the war effort, requiring a reorientation of German policy to acknowledge Ukrainian cooperation. During the 2nd March meeting, Wächter's proposal to raise a Ukrainian division found a receptive audience in Himmler, who, despite initial reservations about the reliability of Ukrainian troops, recognized the dire need for additional forces. Himmler's agreement marked a significant shift, leading to the formal approval from Hitler for the creation of the SS Freiwilligen Division Galicia. Wächter promptly began the recruitment process, involving meetings with senior SS officials and Ukrainian nationalist groups. The support from Ukrainian leaders like Kost Pankivsky highlighted a strategic, albeit uneasy, alliance aimed at creating a professional Ukrainian military force. Pankivsky and others understood that military capability was crucial for political recognition, even as they secretly harbored nationalist ambitions that extended beyond the temporary alliance with Germany. Despite internal warnings to proceed cautiously, Wächter moved swiftly to organize the new division, convening a conference on 12th April with various SS, police and party officials to finalize plans. The Ukrainian committees, after extensive debate, endorsed the division's formation, viewing it as a critical opportunity to establish a professional military force capable of serving broader national interests. This pragmatic approach, though fraught with potential future conflicts, was deemed necessary to combat the immediate Soviet threat. Leading Ukrainian figures and institutions saw the creation of the division as a significant political asset, aligning with German forces out of expediency while keeping the long-term goal of national liberation in mind. Wächter's efforts to form the division underscored the complex and often contradictory alliances formed during the turbulent wartime period. In early 1943, Wächter initiated a recruitment campaign for the SS Freiwilligen Division Galicia, targeting approximately 20,000 volunteers. Emphasizing persuasion over coercion, he instructed German authorities to avoid any forceful methods, underscoring the political significance of voluntary participation. This strategy was highlighted during an elaborate launch ceremony in Lviv, attended by various German officials and Ukrainian representatives. Wächter's proclamation emphasized cooperation in the fight against Bolshevism, promising equal treatment for Ukrainian volunteers alongside German soldiers. Despite the absence of direct references to Ukrainian nationalism, the speech by Professor Kubijovich expressed a commitment to supporting the division, symbolizing a cautious yet significant alliance between Ukrainian leaders and the German administration. The Church's involvement further legitimized the recruitment efforts, despite its initial reservations about aligning with the SS. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, led by the Reverend Labour, agreed to appoint priests to provide spiritual support to the division, balancing their moral concerns with the practical need to care for the volunteers. The recruitment campaign faced several alternatives and opposition from various quarters, including the Polish government in exile and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA. Many young men viewed joining the Galician division as a preferable option compared to anti-Soviet and anti-German guerrilla warfare or oppressive labour conditions. The campaign's success exceeded expectations, attracting more than the anticipated 20,000 volunteers, driven by strong anti-communist propaganda and the lack of viable alternatives. As the recruitment drive progressed, it became evident that the number of volunteers far surpassed initial estimates, prompting discussions about the best use of this newfound manpower. SS officials decided to form a conventional combat force rather than a police unit, emphasizing the elite status of the Waffen SS to attract recruits. Slogans and posters highlighted the urgency of defending Galicia against the Bolshevik threat, resonating deeply with the volunteers, many of whom were young and idealistic. The first group of recruits began their journey to the training facilities in Bohemia and Moravia, where they faced rigorous training and harsh discipline. Despite the challenges, their enthusiasm and commitment laid the foundation for the formation of a formidable fighting force, demonstrating the complex interplay of political pragmatism and military necessity during this turbulent period. The Ukrainians both praised and criticized the facilities and their German and Austrian training instructors at the Heidelager facility. The majority of the first contingent of volunteers were uninitiated novices, and adjusting to the life of strict discipline and endless routine demanded considerable strength and resilience. The rapid expansion of the Waffen SS meant that many of the Galician division's officers were the least reliable from established units and spoke no Ukrainian, further complicating training. However, the transfer of 133 former Ukrainian officers to a 2-month training course in Przecznitz in August 1943 offered some relief from the relentless discipline. The return of the Ukrainian officer candidates in late October coincided with the second phase of the division's organisational structuring, overseen by SS Brigadeführer Walter Szymana. Szymana, with extensive experience in anti-partisan warfare, was not initially utilised for this expertise, as the division was structured to perform conventional battlefield roles with 3 infantry regiments and 3 artillery battalions. The linear military training philosophy of the Kriegsakademie, which emphasized conventional combined arms warfare, hampered the division's ability to handle partisan threats. Szymana's replacement in late October by Fritz Freitag, an experienced officer from the SS Polizei division, did little to shift the focus. Freitag, ambitious and determined, faced criticism for his inflexible leadership style and discriminatory policies that sidelined Ukrainian officers. Freitag's approach, driven by an almost pathological ambition and suspicion, created a rigid and harsh environment within the division. He assigned Ukrainian officers to secondary posts, dismissing Governor Wechter's diplomatic goals for the division. SS Sturmbannführer Wolf Dietrich Heike, who joined as the division's General Staff Operations Officer, noted Freitag's failure to see the bigger picture and his attempts to impose Prussian discipline. Heike's criticisms painted Freitag as a theoretician who commanded from behind a desk, lacking the inspiration and flexibility needed for effective leadership. Despite these shortcomings, Freitag aimed to mould the division into a crack unit, replacing many Ukrainian officers with Germans, causing further resentment. Despite ongoing issues with leadership and training quality, by late January 1944, the general training activities were mostly completed. Freitag took a leave to attend a divisional commander's training course in Hirschberg. During his absence, SS Obergruppenführer Wilhelm Kopper ordered the division to form a Kampfgruppe, battle group for anti-partisan operations against Soviet General Kovpak's forces. This unexpected order disrupted the division's training, as the headquarters staff considered anti-partisan operations improper for the volunteers. Despite efforts to rescind the order, the battle group was dispatched to the Lublin district to hunt down partisan groups, forcing the half-trained troops to learn on the job, further illustrating the ongoing challenges and complexities faced by the Galician division. The rapid advances of the Red Army in the lower Pripyat region during late 1943 and early 1944 led to the release of significant numbers of partisans who then operated in other areas. Some partisan bands moved directly to the west as far as Brest-Litovsk, while others concentrated to the south and southwest in the Lviv-Kovel-Vinnytsia sector, behind the German 4th Panzer Army. German military intelligence identified Major General Saider Kovpak as the leader of several large irregular units. In early February 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Pyotr Vershigora, Kovpak's capable right-hand man, led elements of the 1st Ukrainian Partisan Division in a rapid advance towards the southern area of the Lublin district in eastern Poland, bringing the war close to home for the Ukrainian volunteers. As the fighting moved towards the Subcarpathians and Galicia, various anti-Soviet Ukrainian separatist organizations reappeared but had little effect on the tactical situation. The Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, suffered heavy casualties during clashes with Kovpak's partisans and had to withdraw from active combat temporarily. Observing these significant losses, other Ukrainian nationalist groups chose a more cautious approach, awaiting developments at the front. While this decision had some tactical merit, it was politically disadvantageous, allowing the Soviets to later discredit them as bourgeois nationalists. Meanwhile, at the Galician Division's training camp at Heidelager, the battle group Kampfgruppe Beiersdorf was rapidly assembled following Koper's order reconfirmed on February 15th. This improvised unit embarked the next day for the Cholmshkina region, northwest of Lviv, a hotspot of conflict between ethnic Poles and Ukrainian nationalist groups. After a long journey with frequent stops, the battle group arrived at its deployment zone, ready to engage partisans near Zamosk. Vershigora's partisans received considerable support from the local population, enabling them to carry out successful raids using classic hit-and-run tactics against vital road and rail communications. The contrast between the battle-hardened Soviet partisans and the inexperienced Kampfgruppe Beiersdorf was stark. Trained in traditional linear methods of warfare, the German battle group struggled with the complexities of anti-partisan operations. Historian Michael O. Logus criticized the reconnaissance and patrol activities that began on February 28, 1944, noting the lack of proper intelligence and the failure to adapt to guerrilla tactics. The reconnaissance teams often found only evidence of the partisans' presence, such as abandoned positions and burnt villages, rather than catching them in action. On the same day, Kampfgruppe Beiersdorf began operations. A massacre of Polish inhabitants occurred in the village of Huta Pieniacka, a highly controversial event investigated by various parties over the years. The destruction of Polish settlements in Galicia continued into March, with actions like the Huta Pieniacka massacre being attributed to different forces. While some sources point to the Galician division's involvement, other evidence suggests German units were responsible. The division's role in these events remains disputed, complicated by shifting blame and the fog of war. Historian Timothy D. Snyder argues that the Galician division was marginal to the ethnic cleansing against Poles, attributing greater responsibility to Ukrainian nationalist factions. The brutal environment and the decline of German military power exacerbated the violence, influencing the Ukrainian troops' behavior. The involvement of Ukrainian formations in these anti-partisan operations and their subsequent actions highlight the complexities and brutalities of the conflict in this region during World War II. The Battle of Brody, fought from July 13 to July 22, 1944, was the most significant engagement involving the 14th Waffen SS Galicia Division. This division was part of the 13th German Army Corps, tasked with defending the city of Lviv. Brody is located less than 200 kilometers east of Lviv. As the Red Army advanced westward, Marshal Ivan Konev, commander of the 1st Ukrainian Front, was assigned to capture Lviv. His offensive began in early July 1944. The 13th Army Corps, under the command of Walter Model, was significantly outnumbered, with the Soviets having more than twice the manpower and 3 times the armour and equipment. The 14th Waffen SS was ordered to hold the line at Brody. The division faced overwhelming Soviet forces, including superior armoured and air support, which they lacked. Despite being heavily outnumbered and outgunned, the division fought on even after their German commander General Freytag deserted the battlefield. On July 18th, the division was surrounded, but managed to break out of the encirclement on July 21st to 22nd. Out of the 12,000 men in the division, only 3,000 returned to German lines. Some joined the Ukrainian insurgent army, while the rest were killed, wounded, or captured. Although defeated at Brody, the division's resistance delayed the Red Army's advance for several critical days. This delay allowed thousands of Lviv's citizens, including many intellectuals and political activists, to escape westward ahead of the Soviet occupation, thereby saving them from the impending horrors. The 14th Waffen SS Galicia Division played a controversial role during the Slovak national uprising, which occurred from August 29 to October 28, 1944. This uprising was a significant anti-Nazi resistance movement in Slovakia aiming to overthrow the collaborationist Slovak government led by Josef Tiso and establish a democratic Czechoslovakia. As the uprising began, Slovak resistance fighters, including Slovak army units and partisans, launched a coordinated attack against the German forces occupying Slovakia. Initially, the insurgents achieved some success, liberating key towns and cities and setting up a provisional government with support from the Czechoslovak government in exile and the Allies. In response, the German command deployed several elite units, including elements of the 14th Waffen SS Galicia Division, to suppress the rebellion. They were tasked with quelling the uprising and re-establishing German control over the region. The 14th Waffen SS Galicia Division, along with other German units, faced fierce resistance from the Slovak partisans and the regular Slovak army. Despite being heavily outnumbered and outgunned, the insurgents put up a determined fight. However, the superior firepower and coordination of the German forces, including the 14th Waffen SS, eventually turned the tide. By the end of October 1944, the German forces had recaptured most of the rebel-held territory, effectively ending the organised resistance. The 14th Waffen SS played a crucial role in this counter-offensive, using their experience and resources to systematically dismantle the uprising. Despite the defeat, guerrilla warfare continued in the mountainous regions, with partisans continuing to harass German units and aiding the advancing Red Army. The 14th Waffen SS Galicia Division was also involved in combat against Tito's partisan forces in Slovenia during the latter stages of World War II. This phase of their involvement came as the Axis powers attempted to quell various resistance movements across the territories they occupied. In early 1945, the 14th Waffen SS Galicia Division, which had suffered significant losses in previous engagements, was reconstituted and redeployed to Slovenia. This region was a hotbed of partisan activity led by Josip Broz Tito, whose forces were highly effective in guerrilla warfare against the occupying German and collaborationist forces. The primary role of the 14th Waffen SS Galicia Division in Slovenia was to conduct anti-partisan operations. These missions were aimed at disrupting the supply lines, communications and operational capabilities of the Yugoslav partisans. The division was involved in several key operations, often operating in difficult and mountainous terrain where the partisans had established strongholds. The fighting in Slovenia was intense and brutal. The 14th Waffen SS, known for its harsh counterinsurgency tactics, engaged in numerous skirmishes and larger battles with Tito's forces. Despite their experience and discipline, the division found it challenging to deal with the highly mobile and elusive partisan fighters who employed hit and run tactics and utilized their intimate knowledge of the local terrain to great advantage. From April 1st until the end of World War II, the 14th Waffen SS Galicia Division, comprising 14,000 combat troops and 8,000 soldiers in a training and replacement regiment, fought against the Red Army in the Graz region of Austria. In early April, the division successfully captured the castle and village of Gleikenberg from Soviet forces, which included elite troops from the 3rd Guards Airborne Division during a counterattack. On April 15th, they repelled a Soviet counterattack. During this period, the division held a 13-kilometer front. In one critical situation, General Freitag, alarmed by developments at the front, instinctively announced his resignation as divisional commander in the presence of General der Kavallerie Harteneck, commander of the 1st Cavalry Corps. Harteneck refused Freitag's resignation and ordered him to remain at his post. For his performance during the battles around Gleikenberg, Waffen Obersturmführer Ostap Chuchkevich was awarded the Iron Cross First Class. The division suffered heavy casualties in Austria, with an estimated 1,600 soldiers killed or wounded. On March 17, 1945, Ukrainian émigrés established the Ukrainian National Committee to represent Ukrainian interests to the Third Reich, seeking to provide a unified political front during the turbulent final months of World War II. Simultaneously, the Ukrainian National Army was formed under the command of General Pavlo Shandruk, aimed at consolidating Ukrainian military efforts under a national banner. The Galician Division, a unit with a contentious history due to its collaboration with Nazi Germany, was nominally incorporated as the 1st Division of the Ukrainian National Army. Despite this rebranding, the German High Command continued to list it as the Ukrainian 14th SS Grenadier Division in their official order of battle, reflecting the complex and often conflicting allegiances of the time. As the war drew to a close and the Axis powers faced inevitable defeat, the division found itself in a precarious position. By May 10, 1945, as the Allies advanced and the German war effort collapsed, the division surrendered to British and American forces. This surrender marked the end of the division's active combat role and began a new chapter of internment and legal scrutiny for its members. Despite the official end of their military engagement, the legacy and actions of the division continued to be subjects of historical debate and controversy. The Ukrainian soldiers were interned in Rimini, Italy, within an area controlled by the Polish Second Corps forces. General Pavlo Shandruk, the commander of the Ukrainian National Army, UNA, sought a meeting with Polish General Anders in London. Shandruk implored Anders to protect his men from deportation to the Soviet Union. Despite significant Soviet pressure, Anders succeeded in safeguarding the Ukrainian soldiers by recognizing them as former citizens of the Second Republic of Poland. This effort, combined with intervention from the Vatican, ultimately saved the soldiers from being sent to the USSR. Bishop Buko of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church had appealed to Pope Pius, describing the division's members as good Catholics and fervent anti-communists. Due to the Vatican's intervention, British authorities reclassified the division members' status from prisoners of war to surrendered enemy personnel. This change in status, along with the Polish Second Corps' refusal to deport them to the Soviet Union, ensured their safety. In total, 176 soldiers from the division joined Anders' Polish army. Finally, in 1947, former soldiers of SS Galician were allowed to immigrate to Canada and to the United Kingdom. The names of about 7,100 former soldiers of SS Galician admitted to the UK have been stored in the so-called Rimini list. And that brings our video to a close. I hope you now have a better understanding of the history of the Ukrainian SS Legion. This is certainly a complex topic that requires further study. I plan to create a part 2 soon to cover additional aspects of this subject. As always, please be sure to subscribe and like the video. Both actions go a long way in supporting the channel. A big thanks to our Patreons. If you'd like to join the community, my Patreon is linked below. Lastly, I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.